What's up, guys? Welcome to a special episode of the Young Guns podcast. We're going to be talking about some NHL trade rumors. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the Vancouver Canucks. We know they're not having the greatest start. We spoke about that in one of our previous episodes, this 2022-2023 season, which you guys can go check out. And at the moment, we are focusing on a specific player, and his name is Brock Boeser. He was essentially part of trade rumors last year. We did a whole trade destination video on him last year. He never got traded after all. He actually got extended for another 3 years at $6.65 million. So that would end in 2025, 2026. And, everything came crashing down the night that he was supposed to face the Arizona Coyotes, where he got scratched. And according to Bruce Boudreau, it was due to tough love. Well, he did not make the best decision because it was Hockey Fights Cancer Night. And Brock Boeser's dad passed away due to cancer last season. And, that could be a reason why he didn't have the best season last year. And maybe it's affecting him this year too. And they put Dakota Joshua instead. And then when the news broke out that happened, you know, everyone was talking about it on social media. And I think it reached the organization's ears. They felt like crap, and they drew him back into the lineup, and they said, okay, Dakota Joshua is out, with a minor injury. What are the chances of happening? That was definitely BS, right? So today we're going to be talking about potential trade destinations for Brock Boeser. According to Pierre LeBrun, there's 6 teams that are in contact with Brock Boeser and his representatives because they were given permission to talk to other teams. So, Luca, what is the possibility of Brock Boeser being traded by this deadline? And this time, will he finally get traded?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'd be very surprised if he wasn't traded. I think that Vancouver has tried to trade him for a long time. It always seems like he's been available. I was very surprised he signed an extension with Vancouver this offseason because I honestly thought, his time in Vancouver was done. And I think that Brock Boeser is young enough in his career that he could still kind of bounce back and live up to the expectation that I think a lot of people have for him. If you look at a guy like Tage Thompson in Buffalo and his development and kind of where he's at right now in his career, I think Brock Boeser can still turn it around and become a really good goal scorer in this league. I'm not saying he's going to be a 50-goal scorer, but a guy who can hit 30, 35 consistently on a good team and on a playoff team and a team that uses him and properly. In terms of the teams that are interested, I know that there's been a lot of different rumors going around. The Calgary Flames were a team that was talked about as a potential suitor. Obviously, there's the possibility that he ends up in Minnesota too, just because he's from there and whatever. But I think that there's going to be an interesting situation here with Brock Boeser because he's a guy that his career high in the NHL is a 56-point season. He had a really good year with 49 points in 56 games in 21-22, but the last 2 seasons, especially last year, he really slowed down. And then his dad he lost his dad to cancer in May, and he had a slow start to the year this year. He slowly started to pick it up. He was supposed to be healthy scratched on Hockey Fights Cancer Night against Arizona. Managed to make it into the lineup due to the Dakota Joshua injury. So, it looks to me like Vancouver are trying to cut ties, and I think Brock Boeser is fed up too with the way he's been utilized in Vancouver. And I think it's just best, and I think it's in everyone's best interest to just kind of part ways and just kind of go their separate ways and get what you can get for Brock Boeser and just make that move because I think he wants it. And I think not only does he want it, but I think the Canucks want it as well. So,
Yeah, and they're saying that, the return is not going to be that significant. Whereas if they would have traded him last season at the deadline, they would have actually got a better return. And, under the circumstances this season, Vancouver's doing bad as a whole. And, like you said, there's been a couple of teams that already been interested in Brock Boeser in the past that are still interested in him now. And we're going to start off with the first team, which is where he's from, Minnesota. So the Minnesota Wild. It's a team that, is in need of goal scoring ever since they lost Kevin Fiala, who had a career season last year. He's killing it in LA right now. Obviously, long term, they could replace a guy like that with the prospects they have. But if they still want to be competitive and they want to add a piece that could score goals, Brock Boeser is your guy. Um, There's guys like Goligoski. They can move Matt Dumba, who they've been who trying to move for a couple years. He's been tied to trade rumors for the longest time. So they have definitely pieces there, and I do believe that Brock Besser, being 25 years old only, and being fairly balanced in terms of his statistics. He everyone calls him an elite sniper, but he's also a guy who passes the puck a lot, gets a lot of assists. In 2017, 2018, in 62 games, he had 29 goals and 26 assists in 55 games. In 2018, 2019, in 69 games, 26 goals and 30 assists for a total of 56 points. 2019, 2020, 57 games played, 16 goals and 29 assists for a total of 45. 2020, 2021, 56 games, 23 goals, 26 assists, total of 49 points. And 2021, 2022, 71 games played, 23 goals, 23 assists for a total of 46. And this season, he's not even playing that bad in terms of statistics. He has 16 points in 21 games, 4 goals and 12 assists. Obviously, he's not scoring a lot, and that's probably the problem here. And we've seen a decline in terms of his production as well in the last couple of seasons. He's a former first round pick, drafted 23rd overall in 2015 by Vancouver. So obviously there's going to be a lot of teams that are interested, but what are they willing to give up? And in terms of Minnesota, what can they give up? Because they're a team that also needs to shed some cap space as well. And to make room for a guy like Besser, they're going to have to do that.
Yeah, well, I think like in terms of what they can move, like you mentioned before, Dumba and Goligoski, I think are names. But I think for Minnesota, like it becomes a bigger situation than just acquiring Brock Besser. They have guys they need to sign next year, and I think one of the deals that I think might make Minnesota not do this move is the fact that they went to go get Ryan Reeves from the Rangers and they took his $1.7 million cap hit. Had they not done that, I think they would probably be a team that's in the mix. But because of that, and just because of the fact that I think Minnesota's got a lot of they're cap strapped. They also have to think about signing Matt Boldy at the end of the season as well, and just kind of figure out their cap situation and Kalen Addison as well. This is a team that I don't think can afford to bring Brock Besser in at the asking price or at the full price of his contract. If Vancouver retains salary, then we're going to have a different story. But at that point, that becomes a conversation that is Minnesota willing to make a big trade for Brock Besser. So as much as I do think that, Brock Besser would love to go back to Minnesota, and I think Minnesota would love to have a player like that, you have to take into consideration that long term and just kind of where Minnesota's cap situation is, it doesn't really make sense for them to do that unless they move a guy like Zuccarello during the offseason to kind of facilitate that, which is possible. I don't know what Minnesota's plan is, but I just think that right now, looking at their cap situation and kind of where they're at, I just don't know if they can make it work. But we'll see. Cap management is very interesting in the NHL, and Bill Guerin finds ways to make trades anyways. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to see if
There's a
Minnesota does
possibility
it.
of maybe like a sign and trade because Matt, Dumba is currently getting paid like what, like
Six
$6 million right
million.
now.
Yeah.
So if they extend him to a contract and do a sign and trade and maybe do like a 1-for-1 deal, I think that's possibly an option. But I don't think they're gonna here's the thing now. It's like, do you want, a winger or do you want more assets than that? Maybe you could get a lot more at the deadline. And, Dumba is probably going to sign for a lot less than he's worth right now. He completely regressed to, like, he was a 50-point player back in 2017, 2018. And, the Canucks are in need of defense, right? So, that's obviously a possibility. But moving on to another team, a team that lost that on Johnny Goudreau. They could have traded for JT Miller. That didn't work out. They could have traded for Matthew Tkachuk. They could have signed Nazem Kadri, and that is the New York Islanders. They need a guy to play alongside Matt Barzal. And we all know that Brock Nelson's doing amazing. But, guys like Anders Lee, they're not like at that, level anymore where they're able to score a lot of goals. And we need
Yeah.
someone that around his age to be playing with him so they could properly develop, to have that 1-2 punch like Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield. And I think Brock Besser could be that guy to Matt Barzell.
Yep.
So, I mean, what are they willing to give up essentially in terms
Well,
of assets?
so this is what's interesting, and I actually like that you brought up the Islanders because I think the Islanders are such an interesting team. So I think the Brock Boeser and the Islanders makes a ton of sense, and I'm gonna tell you why. So yes, one of the reasons is the fact that Matt Barzal, needs a winger to play with, and I think Anders Lee's at that age where he's not going to be that guy. But what's interesting about the Islanders is they have three guys on their roster that I think are definitely movable. And again, when you talk about the asking price for Vancouver and Vancouver just wanting to get rid of cap space, I think they can make a deal work here. And I know that people are going to look at me and say, what are you talking about? But listen to this. So the Islanders have Cal Clutterbuck and Matt Martin on 2-year deals. Matt Martin's making 1.5 million. Cal Clutterbuck's making 1.75 million. They're not everyday players in the NHL. I think this is a type of situation where if Vancouver wants to get rid of Brock Boeser's full $6 million contract, I could see a situation where they call the Islanders and say, listen, we'll take Matt Martin or we'll take Cal Clutterbuck off your hands for the next 2 years. We'll give you Brock Boeser's full contract, maybe throw in a draft pick or two,
That would
and
be
we'll
an
get it done.
absolute steal if that happens.
Right? But it's because it all depends on what Vancouver's trying to do in terms of what their value is for Brock Boeser. Right? Because there's been rumors that Vancouver literally just wants to move him and they'll take anything for him. If that's the case, then the Islanders can definitely look at making a move like that. And I think the Islanders have the cap space to do it because the other thing is that, you know, for the Islanders is that they have, they're a team that's been playing well this season, but not only that, they're a team that can
Is
definitely
aging.
afford to trade they can definitely afford to trade a roster player to get it done as well. There's potentially a talk about trading Josh Bailey, who's got 2 years left at $5 billion. He's another one that appeared in trade rumors before the season started. He reached 1,000 games with the Islanders as well. So the Islanders have assets. I think they have pieces they can move, and I think that also, Lou is a very interesting GM. He likes to keep his cards close to his chest. But the Islanders, if they want to make this move, they definitely can, and they have the pieces to do it. They also have the cap space to do it as well. So I believe the Islanders are probably his perfect fit. The other team that I believe is a perfect fit, however, I
Well,
don't think.
before we get into that other team, I just wanted to add
Yeah,
that if they do go the route of potential maybe prospects or picks, I do believe that Kale Adelius, who is a fellow Swede, and the general manager of Vancouver, Alvin, is a Swedish guy as well. That you have the Sedins working in the organization as well. 18 years old, left-handed defenseman, has 3 years left until 2025, 2026 when he's an RFA. He's only getting paid 170 K, so that's a possibility. They're going to be looking for defense if they're going to be talking with the New York Islanders, in my opinion. Don't expect them to get rid of a guy like William Dufour or Atu Ratty. That's not going to happen, like, whatsoever. So,
yeah,
and Noah Dobson and Romanov, those are pipe dreams.
yeah.
Adelius, he's a modern day, two-way puck moving defenseman. So, you know, I mean, is that necessarily the guy that you want? You already have a guy like Quinn Hughes that kind of does that as well. But at the same time, I think they're going to want someone maybe more defensively responsible. But I mean, Odelius is obviously a good prospect that, Vancouver could be asking for. So now you can move on to your next team.
Yeah, so the next team that I was going to move on from, and the one that has been, talked about the most, and, they lost Johnny Gaudreau this offseason, is the Calgary Flames. Now, the Calgary Flames, I just want to reiterate something before, people start going crazy. Calgary can make this work. However, it's going to become very, very complicated for the future. So, kind of like Minnesota, Calgary made a lot of really interesting moves. They signed Jonathan Hubert to a $10.5 million contract, which kicks in next season. They signed Mackenzie Weegar and they signed Dan Vladar to contracts. So, in terms of, is Brock Boeser acquirable for the Calgary Flames? Well, yes, he is. But if they acquire Brock Boeser, well, they're going to have to move on from Milan Lucic. But even at that, I don't think they really need to because, he's got 1 year left and they're probably not going to re-sign him after the season ends. So then your question becomes, okay, well, where do we go from here? So there's Blake Coleman, who makes $4.9 million for the next 5 seasons. Do they move him? Probably not. Then you've got Lindholm. They're not going to move him. They're not going to move to Foley. So the other question becomes Michael Backlund, right? And Backlund makes $5.35 million for the next 2 seasons. If Vancouver wants to make this move, they can free up about $1.4 million by acquiring Michael Backlund, who has a modified no trade clause, but I don't think would be opposed to going to not joining Vancouver. So that is a possibility. Now, if Vancouver wants to also explore a different opportunity, well, there's one guy in Calgary that I think is a guy that I think was highly regarded, but hasn't necessarily always lived up to expectations. However, is having a decent season this season. Dylan Dubé, 24 years old. He makes $2.3 million for this year and next year. He's a guy that if a team like Calgary comes calling in terms of potential trades, well, he's a guy that Vancouver may look at and say, we'll ask for him. He makes 2.3 million. It's a good deal. And the last guy, and the one that I also think makes a lot of sense for Calgary to potentially move, is Nikita Zadorov. He makes $3.75 million for the next 2 seasons. He's another guy that I think could make a lot of sense, just simply for the fact that he was talked about potentially being moved last year. There was talks about him being moved at the offseason last year. And now I think, look, with where Calgary is in the standings, and just the fact that I think they could use a guy like Brock Boeser on their team. I think if you're gonna offer a guy like Nikita Zadorov, Vancouver might look at that and take it, because they would free up about $3.3 million for the next 2 seasons and beyond. So those are the opportunities for Calgary. The only question becomes, does Vancouver want to trade within a divisional rival? And is Calgary really in that position right now where they can acquire a guy like Brock Boeser and potentially make a run? Because they haven't been that good this season. And I don't know what the expectation is for them, if they're expecting to make the
Well,
playoffs or not. But,
look, guys, they're not gonna trade away prospects like Jacob,
yeah,
Pelletier or Connor Zary.
no.
Maybe like more of a mid-tier prospect like Lucas Siona, who's 19 years old. He's an RFA in 26 season. He's being paid about like what, 849
Yeah.
k, so it's nothing. But if they really want to go again based off needs, go after Jeremy Poirier, who's 20 years old. Has 3 more years left on his contract. He's I do believe that that's a possibility, because they need to improve defensively. They're very, very weak defensively. Vancouver's a team that could score goals. They have enough offense to do that, but defensively they're very poor. They let in a lot of goals.
I just
So
don't know. The thing is that I don't know what Brock Besser's value is. I don't know if he's a guy that's valuable in the sense that you can trade him and he'll get a prospect in return. That's why I'm naming guys that are guys that you can free up cap space, because I think that's likely where it ends up, is that it ends up in a situation where he gets traded as a cap dump more than anything else. And I know that people are going to be surprised about that, but I think in this day and age and where the NHL is at, cap space is everything. And
yeah,
so I think that that's kind of where it's at. But just to kind of move on, and we'll talk about one more team. I know that there's 6 teams interested. I think one more team, and probably the team that I think should be in the mix for him, and I'd be very surprised if they weren't, just because they've had a really good start to the year this season, and they're a team that I think would absolutely kill to have a player like this, is the New Jersey Devils. And the reason why I say that is because New Jersey's got a lot of unrestricted and restricted free agents to sign this season. However, one guy that they can move, and it's pretty apparent, and probably the one that makes the most sense, is Andreas Janssen. They make $3.4 million for this season. They get rid of him. They bring Brock Boeser in. Now you've got yourself a really good top six. And then look, if if you don't want to move guys, well, there's also Damon Severson, who was talked about potentially being moved. I don't think he gets traded now, but he was an opportunity. So I think New Jersey probably is the team that I would not be surprised if they're in on him, and I would not be surprised if they actually make this deal happen, because I think New Jersey is a team that could really use a guy like Brock Boeser, even for how well they've played this season. And not only that, they're fantastic. And I think Brock Boeser would do absolute wonders with Nico Hischier or Jack Hughes as a centerman. So I think New Jersey, for me, are probably the team that I would love to see him go to. And New Jersey have not only the assets, but they have the cap space, and they can get rid of some cap space as well in order to make him work. There's guys like Eric Halla, there's guys like Andreas Janssen, like I mentioned, There's also Damon Severson potentially for the future. And there's even another one that people forget to mention, and that's Jonathan Bernier, who makes $4.125 million and hasn't played this season as well. So, and there's also Mackenzie Blackwood. So the Devils do have an opportunity here to potentially make a trade. And with where Brock Boeser is at and where Mackenzie Blackwood is at, I think it could be cool to kind of see a change of
Yeah.
scenery for both players as well.
Blackwood lost his spot. Schmid and Vanacek are
That's it.
absolutely a fantastic duo.
Yeah.
Blackwood, forget about it. There's been issues in the past. So I think maybe swapping an issue for an issue could work. Jonathan Bernier, I don't think he's ever going to come back. I think he's going to probably retire. But
Yeah.
I do believe that Damon Severson would be the ideal guy to go after. Vancouver has been interested in him.
Yeah.
They need to improve their defense.
I just don't know if
So
New Jersey trades them now because of how good they've been, right?
yeah,
So,
exactly. So they're trying. We'll see what happens in terms of New Jersey. We know that the Canadians and Boston have been teams that have been mentioned as well, but we're not going to talk about them today because we think that's very unlikely to
yeah,
happen. Um, but one last team on my end that I'm going to go through very quickly, but I don't think is going to happen because Evander Kane is fastly approaching back from an injury. But
yeah,
Edmonton Oilers, were suffering as well, and this is alluding back to Lucas' point before. Are they going to trade to another Canadian team, especially in the same conference? Like I don't think that's really smart. But if they do, we all know that Puliarvi, expressed how
true.
he's down on his luck right now and he doesn't feel that great playing and he needs to change the scenery, or maybe he just needs to leave the NHL completely. Like he's very in a really bad mind space right now. He's thinking really negatively. But I would see, potentially Puliarvi paired up with maybe a guy like Tyson Barrie, thrown to Vancouver since they need a defenseman, and taking a guy like Puliarvi, that could be a project to work with. And then they could acquire a guy like Besser, so that could work because the money is going to be moved, and they can make the cap space to make that happen. So I mean, we'll see what happens in terms of all that. But guys, we'd like to hear your thoughts on where Brock Besser ends up. Does he end up getting traded by the deadline, or do you think he gets traded during the offseason? And what are you expecting in terms of return? We want to hear from the Vancouver Canucks fan base, but also anybody that's interested in acquiring a guy like Brock Besser. Like whether if you're the Montreal Canadiens, Boston Bruins, New York Islanders, or any of the other teams we mentioned, let us know in the comment section below, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Young Guns podcast. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and have a good night.